There comes a moment in life when something shifts quietly, so quietly that you don't even notice it at first. You've spent decades being a mother or a father, guiding, loving, showing up in ways no one ever saw. You sacrificed without being asked, and you did it willingly. You gave your time, your heart, your energy, and then one day, your children stop listening. They speak over you, roll their eyes at your advice, or simply act as if your opinion no longer matters. It's a subtle ache at first, but over time it grows heavier, and suddenly you find yourself wondering, when did their respect begin to fade? If you've felt that shift, if you've sat in silence after a phone call that felt more like a task than a connection, or walked away from a conversation that left you feeling small, you're not alone. Many parents experience this, and not because they failed, or because their children are ungrateful, but because relationships evolve, and sometimes in that evolution, roles get blurry. Love doesn't disappear, but respect, that can quietly slip away if we're not careful. You might have tried to remind them of all you've done. Maybe you've even gotten angry, raised your voice, or withdrawn completely. But the truth is, demanding respect rarely brings it back. What does work, what truly shifts the dynamic, is something quieter, something more powerful. How you carry yourself, how you respond, how you choose little by little to stand in your own worth again. That's what we'll talk about today. 6 powerful shifts, not aggressive moves, not manipulative tactics, but soft, strong changes that can transform how your children see you. These aren't things to do to get back at them. These are things to do for you. Because the more you root yourself in dignity, clarity, and self-respect, the more others, especially your children, begin to notice and adjust. And if you're watching this not just for yourself, but thinking of someone else, a friend, a sibling, someone in your life who's also quietly hurting in the same way, please consider sharing this video with them. Sometimes a message like this can be the light someone else needs to find their footing again. Let's begin with the first shift. You may not even realize you've been doing this because it often starts from love. It starts with wanting to be close to your children, wanting peace, wanting harmony, but in the process, you begin to bend. A little here, a little there. You say yes when your heart says no. You hold your tongue when you know you should speak. You rearrange your plans, your time, your comfort, just to stay in their good graces. You do this because it feels like love, but what it becomes over time is erasure. The more you chase their approval, the more they begin to treat you like someone who needs permission to matter. And that's not what love is. That's not what family is. There's a difference between being supportive and being submissive. When you say yes out of fear instead of alignment, you're not just losing your voice. You're slowly teaching them that it's okay to ignore it. I once knew a woman in her 70s. Her name was Margaret. She was sharp, well-read, and deeply loving. But every time her grown children came over, she seemed to shrink. She laughed at jokes that made her uncomfortable. She let them interrupt her. She never voiced how she felt, even when their words stung. "I just want them to visit," she'd say. "I don't want to upset anything." But what she didn't see was that in trying to keep the peace, she was losing her presence. And when she finally stood up, not with anger but with calm certainty, the room changed. Her children didn't rebel. They paused. They listened. They adjusted. Respect isn't about dominance. It's about presence. And presence begins when you decide to stop chasing validation and start returning to your own voice. Now let's turn to the second shift. It's one many of us struggle with, especially when we feel dismissed or hurt. When someone, especially your own child, speaks down to you or ignores you, the natural urge is to push back, to argue, to remind them of your role, your effort, your sacrifice. And while those words might be true, the act of arguing rarely brings clarity. It brings more distance. There was a man I once met, Frank, a retired school principal. His children had begun cutting him off mid-sentence. They'd joke about him not keeping up. It hurt, so he fought back, raised his voice, tried to prove he was still sharp, still worthy of their attention. But each argument left him feeling smaller, more drained. Then one day he stopped trying to win. He didn't shut down, he just paused. He began to speak only when there was space for it. He didn't argue. He listened. He asked thoughtful questions. And when he did speak, it was with the kind of steady grace that makes a room go quiet. Over time, something shifted. His children began listening again, not because he demanded it, but because he embodied the very thing they had forgotten: dignity. If you're still here, still listening, still nodding along, thank you. It means something to walk this path together. If you feel these words resonate, feel free to comment, "I'm here," below. It lets me know this space matters to you too. The third shift is more internal, but just as powerful. It's about where we place our emotional weight. For many of us, our children become the center of our hearts, and naturally, we begin to depend on them. Not just for connection, but for meaning. We wait for their calls, we ache when they don't visit, we feel anxious when they're distant, and slowly, without meaning to, our joy becomes tied to their attention. But here's the quiet truth. No one, no matter how much they love you, can be the source of your worth. When your emotional well-being depends on how often your children call or how warmly they respond, you're giving them power they never asked for, and it makes the relationship heavier. It turns love into responsibility. I knew a kind woman named Helen who struggled with this. Her children were busy with their own lives, as children often are, and Helen waited, every day by the phone. When they didn't call, she called them. When they didn't respond quickly, she worried. But instead of drawing them closer, it pushed them away. Her calls felt like pressure. Her texts felt like guilt. Then something changed. Helen stopped calling first, not out of anger, but out of grace. She started taking walks, joined a gardening club, began volunteering once a week at the library. Her life filled with color, with texture, and then the calls came. Her children began to reach out, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. They saw her not as someone waiting, but as someone living. And in that shift, they found respect again. Sometimes the greatest transformation in how others treat us begins not in what we say, but in what we stop allowing. And that brings us to the fourth shift, one that many parents find challenging, not because they don't understand it, but because they've spent a lifetime doing the opposite. It's the practice of setting boundaries, and just as importantly, enforcing them. Boundaries are not walls, they're not cold, rigid barriers that push people away. Boundaries are the lines we draw to protect our dignity, our peace, and the values we've spent a lifetime shaping. Too often, we allow disrespect to continue because we don't want to cause conflict. We tell ourselves it's not worth the fight, or maybe they didn't mean it. And with every moment of silence, every time we let a harsh word slide or brush off a dismissive tone, we unknowingly teach our children that this behavior is acceptable. But respect doesn't vanish all at once. It erodes, one small moment at a time. I once knew a man named Robert, a former business owner who led his company with grace and confidence. But when it came to his adult children, that same authority seemed to vanish. They interrupted him in conversation, made decisions that affected him without asking, and often treated his opinions like background noise. He tolerated it for years, telling himself that keeping the family happy was more important than speaking up. But he wasn't happy. He felt diminished in his own home. One day, something shifted. During a family gathering, when his son spoke over him for the third time, Robert paused. He waited until there was silence and then said calmly, "Please continue when you're ready to listen." There was no anger, no threat, just presence. Later, when his daughter brushed off something he said, he responded gently, "You don't have to agree with me, but I do expect you to respect me." And over time, this quiet strength began to reshape the dynamic. His children realized that their father wasn't withdrawing, but he wasn't tolerating disrespect either. Boundaries teach people how to treat us, and when we set them with consistency, not out of anger but out of self-respect, they become a mirror that reflects our worth back to those around us. If you're still watching this video, thank you for staying with me. It means something that you're here, that you care about not just being heard, but being honored. If you're finding these stories and reflections meaningful, you can let me know by commenting below with the words "still here." It helps build a quiet space for all of us who are walking this path together. Now, I want to talk about something that's both tender and difficult, the way we give. As parents, giving comes naturally. We gave before they could ask. We gave when it wasn't convenient, We gave our sleep, our time, our money, our energy. And even now when our children are grown, that instinct to give remains. But here's what many of us forget. When giving becomes automatic and it's not met with appreciation, it can shift from love to expectation. And nothing destroys respect faster than entitlement. I knew a father once. His name was George. He was generous to a fault. Whenever his children needed anything, he gave it: money, favors, time. He never asked for anything in return. But over the years, something changed. His children stopped saying thank you. They began to expect the help. And when George finally needed support, someone to take him to a doctor's appointment or help with errands, they were too busy. It broke his heart. Not just the lack of help, but the realization that his kindness had been mistaken for obligation. So George did something radical. He started saying no. Not always, not harshly. But when a request came in that would stretch him thin or go unappreciated, he paused and he replied, "I'm not available right now." Or simply, "No, I can't do that." At first, his children were confused. Some were even annoyed. But over time, something subtle changed. They stopped asking so often. And when they did, they said, "Please." They began to see that their father's generosity was not a faucet to turn on and off. It was a gift. And gifts, when seen clearly, invite gratitude. If you've been giving endlessly, hoping that your children will finally see your worth through your sacrifices, I want to remind you, they may see it more clearly when you pause. When you teach them that your time and energy have value, when you give from fullness, not depletion, when your kindness is paired with self-respect, it becomes twice as powerful and far more likely to be received with honor. That brings us gently to the final shift, and it may be the most powerful one of all. It's about you, not as a parent, not as a caregiver, but as a person, a full, complex, beautiful human being. One of the most misunderstood truths of later life is the idea that once your children are grown, your story becomes secondary, that your purpose now is to wait for visits, calls, invitations, inclusion. But the truth is far brighter than that. Respect often returns when your children see you living a life that's full, independent, and meaningful. Not a life that revolves around them, but a life that revolves around your own passions, values, and joy. I once knew a widow named Eleanor. After her husband passed, she turned all her energy toward her children. She called daily, offered advice they didn't ask for, planned her week around their lives, and slowly they began pulling away. It wasn't that they didn't love her, it's that they felt pressure. Every interaction became a weight, not a gift. One day, Eleanor joined a book club, then a painting group. Then she started volunteering at a senior center twice a week. Her voice changed, her eyes brightened. And her children? They started calling more, asking questions, visiting not out of duty, but because they were curious about what she was up to. They saw her not just as mom, but as Eleanor again, a woman with stories, ideas, and life beyond them. And in that, their respect deepened. When your life is full of your own meaning, your own friendships, your own joys, something beautiful happens. Your children begin to see you not as someone waiting for them, but as someone walking beside them, not needing their presence to feel whole, but choosing to share wholeness with them. And that, more than anything, creates a bond built not on guilt, but on admiration. And now, as we come to the quiet close of this reflection, I want you to take just one deep breath, in and out. Let the words settle, not just in your mind, but in that space inside you that has known both pride and pain. That space that has carried love for your children like a hidden flame, steady even through disappointment. That part of you that still believes, deep down, that respect is not too much to hope for, that it's still possible. And you're right, it is. You see, we often think respect is something we must demand, correct, or fix. But in truth, it often returns not through confrontation, but through quiet transformation. It returns when we begin showing up differently, when we shift, not to become someone else, but to remember who we've always been. Someone with wisdom, with boundaries, with presence. Someone who doesn't beg to be valued, but walks in a way that reminds others how much value they already hold. If any part of this message touched something in you, a memory, a moment, a hope, I want to honor that. And I want to tell you this. It is not too late to be seen clearly again. It is not too late to rebuild the kind of relationship where your voice is heard, where your needs are considered, and where your presence is not only acknowledged, but cherished. It starts with you, not with trying harder, but with standing taller. Not with doing more, but with doing what matters. Not with pleasing everyone, but with living in alignment with your worth. And when you live that way, people respond. Even your children, especially your children. Maybe not all at once, maybe not perfectly, but they will feel the shift. And slowly, so will the relationship. So the next time you feel ignored, or taken for granted, or spoken to in a way that doesn't honor who you are, pause, breathe. And instead of reacting from old patterns, remember who you've become. Respond with strength, with grace, with quiet dignity. Because respect doesn't come from fighting harder. It comes from being someone who no longer questions their own value. If this video spoke to you or reminded you of something you had forgotten about yourself, I gently ask you to share it. You never know who might need to hear these words today, who might be sitting alone, wondering if they're the only one who feels invisible in their own family. One small share can open a door. And if you'd like to keep walking this journey together, of healing, of rediscovery, of claiming this season of life with clarity and heart, I invite you to subscribe. Not for numbers, but for connection, for a growing circle of wisdom where your experience matters, where your voice belongs. Thank you for being here, for your openness, for your quiet strength. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. And your presence in this world still carries great weight. Take care of yourself. And I hope I'll see you again in the next video.